talk about it very geographically. So, Taavet, please have a seat.
Hi, Ina, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, definitely. I want to get into all the things about how startups look different from Europe, and Europe obviously is not monolithic. I think when people talk about European startups, they're not necessarily thinking about Tallinn and Estonia. But maybe it'd be helpful. You have a really interesting background, part of the venerable Skype mafia. Talk about sort of what you're doing now and kind of how you got there, your time at Skype, et cetera.
So I think it really goes back to my origin. So I was born in the Soviet Union before that collapsed, and then I was lucky to meet Niklas and Janus, who were the two guys who started the Skype. I think that's kind of where Europe, and the European story starts developing. You have a Swede and a Dane who end up starting a company in Estonia. And then after being part of the Skype story from the very beginning, when we had an idea on the back of a napkin, after that it felt really weird to go and get a job somewhere. So I ended up focusing on one of the problems that I had while working for Skype. So when I moved to London during my Skype time, I realized that banks are really screwing you when you're moving money across country borders. And then found that that's the next problem that needs to be solved. And we built Transferwise, I think, in a very European way. So we had our first employees in Estonia and Ukraine. The two founders were based in London, and today we're a team of 2,000 people with a global business. And given that Transferwise has gone pretty well, it is a bit of an adult child now. So I'm able to spend a bunch of my time thinking of other things and investing in European companies, supporting other founders with, we do a program called 20 under 20 with Transferwise, where we try to find the brightest European founders who are under the age of 20 and help to mentor them and help to shape their thinking and help them to build their businesses, or just investing in companies myself.
And Transferwise is kind of everything that I think of when I think of European startups that are successful. I think one of the mistakes that I see a lot is companies trying to do the Me Too, the this of Europe. And whereas I think when European startups are most successful, they're bringing their knowledge and where the expertise is to a specific problem. And so, for example, I think in a lot of fintech, the US is really behind because we don't have the same challenges moving money, and Americans, I think to our detriment, we don't go anywhere. So we don't need to transfer money across borders. That's not universally true. Obviously, we have a huge immigrant population. There has been a lot of innovation, particularly in US and Mexico and South America bringing money. But to bring it back to you, I'm curious how you look at it. What do you look for in a startup? What do you want to see? What are the red flags that make you go, I don't trust this company?
I guess if you're looking at something early stage, it really comes down to the founding team. Do they have it in them to go and focus on this singularly for the next 5, 7, 10 years? It's a journey which gets hard at some point, and then it's not your investors who will help you motivate. It's really kind of having a belief that there's something wrong in the world and you're building to fix that, which will help it. You need to have the tenacity of a long-distance runner in you to go and do it. But then the other thing which matters is, actually, is there a big problem? Is there a big market? And do these people have a product which is 10 times better? Mm-hmm. The challenge is, if you build a better mousetrap which is 10% better, that's, it might be a good thing, but it's very hard to bring that to life in a global way.
That makes total sense.
So, if you have a product which is 10 times better, then it does a lot of the marketing for itself and enables you to go on a global scaling journey. I think it's no question that with Skype, if you go from the experience of calling the operator and saying, hello, I'd like to talk to America, and then they move a few wires around.
They don't do that anymore?
Well, maybe in America, but not in Europe. If you go from that to a high-definition video call for free, it is 10 times better. And in case of Transferwise, instead of having to go and walk to your bank and stand in line in a branch for an hour and a half, and then lose a big chunk of money you're sending, you can do that on your smartphone, which is only bank branch that matters nowadays. It's similarly a 10 times better experience.
Does it matter to you where the startups are geographically or how they're thinking about geography? You know, the old saying used to be you had to move to the US. Obviously, you guys aren't doing that, right? Does it matter to you in the startups that you look at?
So I think the first thing that matters is they have to think of the global market as their target, and their customers need to be global. It's even a benefit that if you go with if you start from a very small country like Estonia, then you have virtually no customers in that country, so you have to think globally right away. But when it comes to where the company is based, I do think you can build startups anywhere. Yet there is obviously a benefit to hubs. I guess I feel that Silicon Valley is probably a little bit kind of overblown today. It's too expensive, too hard. Your employees move every 6 months, but being in a hub, but whether that's London or Paris or Tallinn or Tel Aviv or Barcelona, we have a lot of these hubs in Europe. I think that's the beauty of Europe.
And when you think about expanding for Transferwise, do you still think about it? All right, can folks hear me now? All right, third time's the charm. When you think about expanding for Transferwise, do you think about more places in Europe? Do you think about outside of Europe?
The last offices we opened were, I was in Malaysia opening an office there a couple of months ago. We were opening an office in Brazil, so we're a truly global business now that we're going where the customers are.
And one of the things, your headquarters, right, are in London, and they're having a little issue with Europe that I've been reading about. How has that impacted it, and how do you think that's going to impact London-based and Britain-based tech startups?
So I think for companies that are mature, Transferwise, or let's say any company which is in hundreds of employees and kind of knows what they're doing, I think the impact is small. These companies will figure it out. They open up another office. Like we had to open an office in Brussels to become our European headquarters. We need a license in Europe, and for us with 14 offices, it's easy. We add one more. We've done it a dozen times. So I think for the companies that are already on the way, it's not a big deal. However, London and UK do lose out because these companies will create these jobs, but if they wanted to do them create them in London, now they will create them elsewhere.
And you've already seen that, right, with startups, both with the startups you're investing in, but also when it comes to where you're hiring. I imagine, I've heard anecdotally, it's tough to get people to come to London.
I mean, as the drama is going on, which I think is still the case today, it's hard to convince people that, hey, come to London. It is a great place. I mean, I don't think London is going to become a horrible place anytime soon, but it's definitely more challenging to convince people to come to London. And, it is really about access to talent. That's what defines who wins in this race.
And what do people, shifting geographically a little bit east, what is the startup scene like in Estonia? What are some of the things that are going really well that other places could learn from, and what's still challenging there?
So I think Estonia really benefited from an early success story. Mm-hmm. So when Skype was sold to eBay, the first sale in 2005, I was kind of unheard of. A company 2 years old gets sold for several billion. But what it did is it legitimized this whole startup thing. Like in 2005, if a young boy or girl went to work for a startup, their mom would ask, "What's wrong with you? Did the bank not want you? Were you not good enough for the telecom?" But having that first big success story really legitimized it. So I think that was really helpful. Second thing is it created a cohort of people who'd seen what it means to scale a global business. There are today probably, maybe 2,000 people in Estonia who at some point worked for Skype. They all saw what that means. And lastly, it gave them capital, whether it's people who made money because they were early employees at Skype, or people who actually, spent 5 years working for then a global business which paid them well above the Estonian average, and they saved half of it, which paid for their first 2 years of starting their own company. So that was hugely valuable. And now you can look at Estonia, a tiny country, 1.3 million people, and we have probably 4 unicorns now. So,
then the government picked up the ball too, right, and created some policies to encourage that.
Yes, the government was very helpful, and I think that's a great thing. But I think the biggest thing is kind of do less and get out of the way. It's about picking up certain things and fixing these, which was helpful, if you think about visas and so on. But I think, overall, the government has also been an early adopter in Estonia. We've had an e-government, and we have now the e-residency program. So that's kind of, just overall, just adds a little bit to, sometimes you call it's adding to the hype, but it's important that they talk about it.
And I do see what you see, and I've traveled to a lot. I spent a fair amount of time in Finland off and on, and each of these countries wants to be the next Silicon Valley, and the ones that I've seen be the most successful look at where is their unique skill, and still try and adopt the things that you need. You need a university pipeline. You need, obviously, access to capital. Where are the other places that you're seeing the right ingredients for startups?
I mean, I would actually say you see it all over Europe. Estonia, 4 unicorns with just about 1 million people. You go across the pond to Finland and you look at all the gaming companies that have been started there. Maybe the cold and dark winter really is good for something. Or, look at Sweden with Klarna, iZettle, Spotify, Somehow it looks like there are not that many startups coming from Sweden, but the ones that come are really big. And London has, I think the previous speaker has the latest figures, 21 fintech startups now. You go to Berlin, there's a lot happening, so more companies in Barcelona. I think that's the beauty of Europe. You're going to have so many little Silicon Valleys, each a little bit different, but all in all, it's going to be very, very competitive.
And what do you think is still harder? What should founders be prepared for, other than obviously all the things that just startup life is not easy? But what are the challenges of being a European startup? One of them strikes me. It's a benefit to society, but it's a challenge for startup. Is obviously the more protective data laws. But what else? What other things?
I think the bigger thing is people's attitude. It's a kind of the attitude to risk taking and failure and competitiveness. In China, the startups are following 996, so 9 days of work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So 6 days a week.
I was really impressed with the 9 days a week, but even 6 days a week is more than Europe.
I'm sure they would try 9 days a week. But in Europe, I think that's kind of hard to see. But then the attitude around failure, In Europe, someone started a startup and failed, and people look at him like, hey, he kind of failed with something. Same person in America failed 3 times, and people look, oh, he's experienced. I'd like to work with him.
Yeah, he becomes a venture capitalist.
Yes.
Sorry to all my VC friends.
So I think that's the hardest thing, and it takes time and success stories to change it.
And what do you think is sort of missing from the conversation? What are the things that we should be talking more about and we aren't talking enough?
That's a very hard question. I think globally, the question is, if you look at US, obviously it has a huge lead in the tech world. Everything is becoming tech now, and then we have China. And we have Europe, which has a lot of the good base ingredients. You look at last year, venture capital investment in UK, I think, grew 44%. I think Germany and France were like ballpark 30. US, I think it dropped. Mm-hmm. So, we're growing faster than US. Do we catch up? When do we catch up? That's, it's still hard. Like, we have the ingredients, but can we pack that together into a punchy enough thing to catch up to US, or like how long will it take? I'm optimistic, but
it seems like we are seeing the pendulum shift. A few years back, I'd say one of the big challenges was it felt like a lot of the startups were solving rather small problems. Maybe this was different in the US. Maybe Europe was out of necessity and also wisdom ahead of us. But, you know, we were, my old boss, Kara Swisher, called it assisted living for millennials. You know, it was all the things that we should do for ourselves, somebody would do as a service. Do you think we're taking the right lens? Is it, you know, I think of it as a camera and a lens, and it was maybe too focused before, we're widening out. Are we focused on the right things?
So lens is widening. You see, you know, I think fintech is one area where Europe has been ahead of the US. Now the question is, are we catching up in the rest? And, you know, what's next? You know, maybe in areas like health tech, you know, very broad, but, you know, maybe there we're gonna be also ahead of the US. So.
And what about you? What's next for Transferwise and for you?
Transferwise, you know, we're continuing to grow. It's, you know, a repetitive process year over year. See how quickly we can make sure that around the world we help people get access to better financial services. You know, if we go anywhere we go, we look at it. You know, still banks are providing a pretty lousy service, and I think there is so much better you can do in the very specific area where we're focused on. And, you know, we've been able to make some big change happen. So in Europe, there was a law passed, which is gonna be implemented in all European Union member states over the coming months. Which means any financial institution now will have to disclose how much they are charging on FX transactions. So pretty great to see that, you know, there's a, you know, probably Europe as a continent will become the best consumer protected in this area, which will further accelerate Transferwise and similar services.
I think in general, you've not really looked at the US as a great market for you. It has, you have to have a banking license in every state, right? Is that something you'd consider?
I mean, the regulatory competition, I think that's an area where Europe is miles ahead when it comes to fintech. Transferwise is in the US. It's in fact our biggest market now. So we're very...
Shows you my knowledge.
Very, very excited about that. The challenge is that we're less relevant because there are less people who need to transfer money abroad, less people who travel. So, but, you know, the ones who do benefit a great deal from using what we can offer.
And in terms of what you've heard at the conference, what's sort of on your mind, what are the things that you think are more important now than ever? What are the things that you're kind of, if you're like, I need to focus my attention, what are a couple things that really you're focused on?
For me, it's about helping Transferwise and helping the wider European ecosystem. You know, I think when we talk about figuring out what are the ways to help the upcoming generations of entrepreneurs in the best way. You know, how do we make sure we get more diversity in the entrepreneurial pool? How do we make sure that these people get better support when they're getting going? So, you know, in the end, help Europe have more of the success stories.
And what are a couple investments that you've made recently that you think are tackling big, important problems? So,
for example, in the diversity area, there's a new fund called Ada Ventures in London, which is very much focused on how to find entrepreneurs that are coming from the non-traditional backgrounds. So, very excited to see new funds coming up in these areas.
It's really important, and that is something I haven't seen as much in Europe. I mean, the US, certainly a male-dominated, certainly majority white in terms of the capital, and it's a huge problem. It remains a huge problem. But it seems like in Europe, it was at least identified as a problem in the US. I don't know how much progress has been made, so it's good to see. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. If you enjoyed my moderating, I do a daily newsletter for Axios. You can get it at getlogin.axios.com or just give me a business card and I'll sign you up. Thanks so much.
Thank you.